Hello and welcome to Upclose with Upward. Today we have Pankaj Saxena, a very good friend of mine, and the co-founder of Brhat, as well as the director of cultural studies at Brhat. Welcome to Upward once again. You have chosen a particularly polluted day. I think this is the worst day in terms of air pollution in Delhi. And while I was coming from the office to the studio, I was wondering, one, why you chose this day? Is there some deeper meaning behind it? And secondly, that I got reminded of your work at Brhat and how you're working towards infusing the policy, the government policy with Indian knowledge systems, right? And I was wondering that there would be, in the current framework, there is no real solution to this problem, as we know. So I was wondering what exactly your work at Brhat in this domain is, if you could help us with that to start with.
First of all, thank you for inviting me here. This is the first time I think on camera that we are talking to each other.
So we have to maintain a certain...
We'll maintain something.
Yeah.
So, about the particular day, I think this particular day chose me. If you study the history of any civilization, when they urbanize, there comes a certain period in the life of every country, every city, where you have these frequent smogs, particularly during winters. So in most other civilizations and cultures, it is a structural problem and you have to solve it because of certain things, and it's not very difficult to see what is the problem, how to solve it. In India, right now, it is not simply structural problem. It is also a political problem because we do not want to unsettle some states, some communities. That's why we are once again not trying to solve very actively the problem that has been foisted on Delhi. I would say it is there. The problem is natural, but it could also be solved very easily, but it is not being solved. So, but that is the state where India is an apple cart right now. You are worried that if you do this, then this apple will fall out. If you do that, then that apple will fall out. And so that permanent state of sclerosis is always there. That brings me to your question about Brhat and what we do at Brhat. When we started Brhat and we were thinking, mulling over what we are doing, we had a clear idea, but how exactly to voice it. So we started saying that we want to connect culture to policy, and we were warned vociferously against that. That why are you doing this? Policy has nothing to do with culture. And if you work in policy, if you say that you also work in culture, nobody will accept what you say in policy. And we said that that is exactly what we intend to change. Policy has to be governed by culture. Policy is governed by culture, either yours, or if you leave it open, then some other culture will take over and it will govern your policy. Even today, our policy is governed by a certain culture, but that culture is not ours. That civilizational cultural paradigm is not ours. Our attempt here is to first make people aware the important link between culture and policy, that it is inevitably linked with it. And if your own religion, civilization and culture do not take hold of your own policies, then some other culture will, because it's a vacuum. And some other culture, civilization will, and we will create that apple cart where we have ended up right now. That we are lost. Every new problem, we are just taken aback. And we try to do something ad hoc. Let's do this, let's do that. But there is no clear, I would say, aggressive policy, a forward-looking policy in which you already have a plan for next 400-500 years.
Right.
We just tackle problems as they come. But this is not how civilizations operate.
Yeah. So basically, you're talking about the long game. That,
yes.
That you need to have some sort of a vision.
Yes.
Which is at least 100 years ahead, perhaps even more.
Yeah.
But so that that raises an important question in my mind, which is that given the nature of democracy, and we've talked about it earlier, that democracy operates in such small time cycles that there is no incentive structurally to plan way ahead. Everything is borrowed from the future.
Yeah.
You borrow from, whether it is in the economic sense or it is, and it is inevitable that one day you will have to repay that debt, and you keep delaying that till the time that it is no longer sustainable, right? And then there is a crisis.
Yeah.
So when you say that at Brhat you're working to influence policy through culture, right? In this framework of democracy, can you help us with some example of how it will change? I understand that it will not, we are not talking about perhaps not a radical change, because there is a limit to how much influence you can have within this framework.
Yes.
But if you could help us with some examples.
Yes. So when people say that, when you talk about constitution, let's say, I will take just a small example. And they say, do you agree with the constitution or do you respect the constitution? I say we can do both. We can respect as it is right now because it is a legal document, and then also angle for changing it. So similarly, while we can respect the limits of democracy that we are currently in, and while work within those boundaries, we can also point our policy towards the faults that it has, and later on hope to solve it. We talked about link between culture and policy and how an alien culture has come to influence our policy, which is basically the Enlightenment, Western Enlightenment paradigm. Democracy itself is a fruit of that paradigm. So it's not a universal mechanism. And as soon as you say that, people pounce on you that, do you not want elections? Do you want people to stop voting? None of that. But it is a setup in which, as you say, small-term thinking is encouraged, but only about the majority community, which is sold this idea completely that the Enlightenment paradigm is good for you. In such a scenario, any militant minority which is determined enough and which has a long arc, which has a long vision, it will keep pursuing policies after policies. It will keep its culture to push policy towards what it wants to be done. And so we see that certain sects, prophetic monotheistic sects and their ideologies, they keep pushing the same agendas over centuries. Now, US democracy is more than 200 years old. But you see that even after more than 100 years of the influence of Swami Vivekananda went more than 100 years ago, you cannot say that it is Hindu even 1%. I'm not talking about the population. That how is its soul or its character Hindu? It is not. It is still very much Judeo-Christian.
Correct.
So it means that certain ideas which have a very long vision, which can keep pushing the same barrel in democracy and angle for it. Now, what is very interesting is that they sell this idea to communities which are traditional, which are ancient, which are very old, like India and China. But at the same time, within this democratic, very academic democratic setup, they advocate very radical policies for those same militant minorities which have now created fifth columns in your country. For example, let's take the case of Nagaland, a very small case. There are established chairs in Bhutan, Oxford and Cambridge, very good scholars who argue that democracy is not apt for Nagaland society, Naga society. They have written works on it. They have studied them for decades and come up with very good theories and that how this democracy doesn't work for them. They don't follow it and how it is good. They even published a very good scholar, I would say. He teaches in University of Bhutan in Thimphu, and he keeps visiting Nagaland, also in Cambridge. He says that he has published a book, Naga as a Society Against Voting. And he makes the case of how culture and policy are linked, and Nagamese culture is not conducive to enlightenment democracy, and they have a right to differ. So all of these right to differ dissent are given to non-traditional, non-native societies. The same argument, if you say that Hindus were to make...
How is the Naga society non-native that way?
In their religion, it's non-native, and that's how the West sees it.
Okay.
So there is some paraphernalia. They are taken as tribal societies. Now that's a different issue, but most of their cultural icons and cultural practices are gone. 90% of them are eliminated. What we see is a very museumized culture. When you go to Hornbill Festival, there is a village in which no Naga lives now. They are empty huts, empty morungs. where they come up for 10 days and 15 days, and the entire world comes, and this is the Naga culture. They are not living that culture anymore. Just like what happened to Philippines when they converted them, the same thing is Nagaland. So they see it as a frontier, because the Southern Baptist Church is extremely active there. And Southern Baptist Church is the greatest church in US also. It is a spearhead in converting any new community wherever they go. So this is being argued. You can differ from this model of democracy. This is being argued for other communities. Hindus have to take courage. Hindus have to take things in their hands and start studying first. I'm not saying respect this democracy as it is now, but build the case of how you are different and how you can have a different system.
Right. So could you elucidate this point with an example which is narrower in scope?
Yeah.
Like, for example, that this is how it is happening right now.
Yeah.
And if we were to have a culturally aligned policy, how would we treat that?
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah. For example, there is a very famous case of related to temples. That in that case, the government or the state was not even trying to actively go against a tradition or traditional practice, but it was simply ignorant and apathetic to...
Are you talking about Sabrimala?
Not Sabrimala. I'm talking about the actually Tenant Act and how it destroyed the beautiful temple ecosystem.
Okay.
I guess it came in 70s or something. I'm not conversant with the exact year when it was. But this Tenant Act said that any person who is found to be living on a certain piece of land for more than certain years, might be 15, 20, I do not know, then that land of peace, if its deed is not on anyone's name, that deed, government will do the deed on the name of the person who is occupying that land. Now, how Hindu temples operated is that it was the center of the town, of entire social, political, every economic life of the town. It is said that Deepa Duraiswamy says very beautifully that temples were not built at the centers of towns. Actually, towns were built around the temples.
Right.
So this is how the beautiful ecosystem came to be. Yeah. So it was the very center, and the practice was that charity happened through temple. So the king would donate to the temple, the Vaishyas would donate to the temple, everyone would donate to the temple. Does not mean that no other charity existed, but of course a huge chunks of charity went to the temple, and temple would give it back to those who needed it. Right. So there was a redistribution system, and certain of our text says that in peace times, every 5 years, the king has to empty his coffers and donate it to the temples. Oh, wow. So that this redistribution keeps happening, and no great divide is created within society. But the temple has to be the center. So what temples used to do, they used to give the land back to certain people who need it to till and to live. And you could live on that land. Your children could own that land in that sense. They could also till it, use its produce, and do one seva in the temple. So that was not a right. That was a kripa in exchange of a service to the temple. The thing was that, so that the temple ecosystem is not disturbed, they were not allowed to sell that land. Anyone who got that land from the temple, they were not allowed to sell that land. So that the beautiful ecosystem, landscape-wise, living system-wise, architecture-wise, and every other way was maintained. Tenant Act with one stroke, whoever was living on those lands for 400 years, 300 years, suddenly, and many of these temples were in the center of big cities. So suddenly, overnight, those land became crores and they started selling it. At first, not many people sold, but then gradually, this is how economy works, that they will push for it. And within one stroke of pen, when they did not even want it or aimed at it particularly, they destroyed a beautiful ecosystem by a different law. This is because you are unaware of your own culture, that how does your own society function? The temple is a legal ecosystem, legal, social, political ecosystem in which everything about Hindu life is centered. And this land, of course, they are living on it for 300 years, but it is not for selling. This is how the ecosystem works. So if our lawmakers had known that, if we had been teaching our policymakers our culture, they would not have done this. This was not even done with malice or some intent to harm. It was just done because they were not aware. They were simply not aware. Most of the people who make these anti-Indian civilizational policies within India, they are not bad people.
Right.
They simply just do not know. They are not taught about it. So this is a very clear example of how, if you're not aware of your culture, you can make a policy which can actually destroy it.
True. So this is a very interesting example. And one of the features of this system that you talk about is the is the restriction on financial transaction, right? That you cannot sell that land.
Yeah.
It is strikingly similar to the Jajmani system also, where a lot of the services were exchanged in exchange of goods, and there was no money involved, which is kind of unthinkable in the modern era. And if you were to, if you talk about these things and you say that, here is a feature of this old system that is perhaps, that will save a lot of our heritage maybe, or keep things safe and sound. The argument from the other side is that this is regressive and that you're going back to the barter system. And there's perhaps a paragraph that you've read somewhere in class 6th or 7th, where it says that, it was earlier the barter system, then money came in. And that has become such a deeply ingrained idea that, barter system, wo to bahut primitive tha, and that there can be no going back because that is regressive. So I think, a lot of the arguments that you make, and or other people also, the kind of opposition that you get is because people quickly assume a lot of things, that they are talking about reversing the direction of progress. And this is the typical progressive versus traditional trope that comes in. Which reminds me of the traditional argument when you say that, I've seen some of your talks earlier where you have talked about the relationship between culture and nature and how that has changed in the current era. So tell us something more about that.
Yeah. So this thought came to me very accidentally when I read one of the greatest philosophers that I have ever read. He's not even known as a philosopher as such, Loren Eiseley.
Right.
He's known as a scientist who mused, and his prose is so literary that when he writes on anything, it's very poetic, it's very beautiful. So I was reading him, and he was remarking on the industrial society. And those beautiful paras, he conveys a few facts. He says that at first, when man came out of the food chain, in nature, everyone, like Ram Manohar Ji says, an expert of Ayurveda, he says it beautifully. In nature, everyone at the same time is being the hunted and the hunter. Even the hunter at all times is at the risk of being hunted. And if it's the apex predator, then there is the danger of starvation, any number of accidents. But the nature limits you. But when for the first time man came, with the help of technology that he discovered, man came out of the food chain, he became the apex predator with no one to hunt him or harm him. That severely disturbed the food chain and the natural balance, ecosystem, and all the ecological balance. Actually, what culture is, and this is the most groundbreaking insight that I have ever read in my life, ever struck upon in my life. He says that culture is nothing but that human civilization mechanism by which we actually clamp back those limits which are broken by man against nature. Those natural limits which are destroyed, culture just puts up through those arbitrary laws, limits through legal and social laws, and puts in those same checks and balances which used to be there when nature used to limit us, but which are no longer there. So now it's our responsibility, culture's own responsibility, to clamp those same limits again. Any culture which does this is dharmic. Any culture which does not do this is not dharmic. There is a very clear-cut distinction. And he says that the havoc that you see everywhere is, he says, nature is the first order, culture is the second order. And he says that we are in this mess because we have broken both of the orders. This nature-culture continuum that used to be everywhere. If you see Sanatan Dharma, that continuum is everywhere. Now, a lot of scholars are doing deep history. And they say that this anthropocentric view, where kings and queens and their tales are most important, this is not history. We have to take in other species into it. We have to take in plants and animals into it. And they are getting crores of grants and all over the world. In JNU, many such studies are being done by Northeastern scholars. One of them, Pachwao, Joy L. Pachwao, has written a very good history, Entangled Lives, on Northeast.
Okay.
And she says that we have to incorporate plants, animals, and all of that. But if you read our text, if you read our Shastras, if you read Puranas, if you read the folk Lok Sanskriti, if you study Lok Sanskriti, our view was always that man was special only in one sense, that we were capable of reflecting on our own existence. We were capable of getting out of this cycle by doing sadhana, by doing meditation. In every other way, we were integrated well with our society. You do not even need to go to the text. When I remember my grandmother, she used to cook for all of us. And the first roti was for, of course, the cow. The last was for the dog. And Banwariji also says it beautifully, whatever flour would stick to the pot, she would put it for ants to eat. So even ants, for ants to eat.
Oh, achha.
So even insects were incorporated in our worldview.
Right.
And this is how it was done. And after that, when she would offer that food, first of all to the fire, then to the gods, then to the ancestor, Pitra, then she would go in the garden, offer it to the plants. And of course, the animals were there. Then we would eat. So in this 1 hour activity of cooking and eating, you could see that we did it so there was a great nature-culture continuum. But the Western society defines culture as the way we use technology to control the forces of nature for the use of man. And that is, they have always seen it as a struggle, man versus nature. Right. Even now you have shows
Man versus Wild,
and how man struggles against nature, and how the victory of man over nature is something very celebrated there, because they have this frontier mentality of those cold polar spaces, and that you have to go, you have to survive anyhow by killing, by destroying entire ecosystems. So if you read the diaries and works of those frontiersmen in 18th century, 17th century, Canada, US, and many other places, it is so shocking how they would destroy entire ecosystem just so that they can get resources for 1 or 2 days. And because the land was so huge and the people were so few, that at that time it didn't matter that much, and the entire picture was not clear. But this is how they have imagined this line of progress that you refer to. That when regressive, when will you say that it's regressive? When you see it as a line which is coming from past, which is behind, which is going to future, which is forward somewhere in future, and future is greater, past is worse. If you see it only like that, past is bad, future, past is poor, future is rich, past is bad, future is good, past is back, future is forward. If you see it only in that vector, then you will say that it's regressive. Otherwise, how we have seen is that there are cycles. Some things get created, some things get destroyed. For example, there is one, Shiv Kumarji says that there is this concept of Srishti, Sthiti and Laya. For example, this modern world is all about creating, but not about how to uphold it. Dharma Shastras are mostly about the Dharmic societies that you have. How do you uphold it? So that you perpetuate this civilization further down the generations and future. And then there is Laya also, that if you keep creating, that's cancerous growth.
Correct.
And there is no destruction at the same time, that's cancer. So this modern creativity is actually cancerous. So if you see it from that point of view, then it will seem regressive. And then they come up with some ridiculous ideas that they do not want electricity and they do not want this and that. That is, of course, absurd. But any civilization, even the Western civilization, keeps the cores and the fundamentals alive. And that's how it changes.
True.
Sanatan is not old. When you argue about Sanatan is not new. It is that which always is.
Yeah, ever new.
Yeah. And keeping the universals alive. So it doesn't mean that at certain point of time it will become so different that there will not even be a single point of touch between the past and it. That will mean a break. But it is not about break, it is continuous. Because anything which disappears, even when you read the spiritual text, the very definition of what is Maya and what is unreal is that which disappears, which is not continuous in existence. So Sanatan Dharma is Sanatan because it cannot disappear and then become new, completely new. So it has to keep those universals alive. Those universals are a few. They are not very much. 4 or 5 axiomatic truths about being Hindu. They have to be kept alive, and then things change as we go, as what is needed.
What are those 4 or 5, if you can just...
Yeah, as my when I went to this might be people might argue on it. That's okay.
That's why I'm asking the question, because this is a question that any such conversation will inevitably bump into.
Yeah.
That who is a Hindu?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What does it mean being a Hindu?
So it's always good to have a multiple perspectives on what it is. I asked the same question to another guest a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
So I would like to hear what you have to say about it.
So I'd like to start from what my guru told me when I went to him for the first time. I was curious about, of course, I read a lot, and I was asking how to read this text and this text and that text. And he said that forget everything for now, read just one text. And remember, what is the bedrock of our religion? Dharma. And he said, it's first of all, you have to start from the concepts of karma, prarabdha and punarjan. Everything starts from there. There is no way you can deny and conceive yourself as a Hindu after denying this. That there is, when you live, there is karma. Karma creates a prarabdha, a baggage, good or bad. That leads to another birth, and that is punarjan. This is how you perpetuate. The very idea of moksha is to get out of this cycle, and this is how the cycle progresses. And even Buddhism subscribes to this. When it didn't agree with Atma and Brahma, not agree, when it didn't mention, even then it doesn't go out of this karma, prarabdha and punarjan cycle. Yeah. But then what makes us Hindu? Because with this definition, even Buddhists will be Hindu. The respect of Vedas is critical, as I see it. You cannot replace Vedas. And as you see history, any Indian sect, Indic sect, which has replaced Vedas with some other book, let's say, it has gone against Indic culture and civilization over time. So the respect of Vedas is very critical. Now, this does not mean there is nothing outside Vedas. Of course, nobody is saying that. But the respect for Vedas has to be kept as it is there, because that is what defines our identity. That's the bedrock.
Right.
Now, this is the axiomatic truths. Now, what does it mean to being Hindu? What does it mean in action? For me, it is the concept of pancharina, because Hindu cosmology operates on the belief of that while you are born, a certain dharma is what? When you discuss rit, rin and dharma, that just by the sheer act of living, a rin is created on you. For the better use of a word, I would use debt only here for rin. We can use it for the time being, although it's not debt. But just when a child is born, he cannot take care of himself. Somebody feeds him or her and clothes and does everything for them. When he grows up, he needs a safe road to walk. He needs a safe society to live. That is the society doing things for him. He needs a natural order to be intact. He needs a comet to not collide with Earth for his life to perform smoothly. Yeah. So all of this creates multiple rinas on him. Right. To repay those rina is dharma. So entire idea of being Hindu is based on kartavyabodh. That based on where you are born, in what circumstances you are born, what are your duties, what are your responsibilities. This is why they say, P.V. Kane also said, that the Hindu worldview is based on the idea of duties and not rights. Right. This does not mean that there are no rights, but rights are ensured by duties.
Subservient to the duty.
Subservient to duty. You fulfill your duty, that's how the rights will also be taken care of. Because when you're doing your duty towards your parents, of course their rights are preserved through your duty. This is how it happens. So what are those pancharina? So they say, as they are listed, there is of course devrin, that you pay your homage to the deities, to the powers that are. Then there is pitrarin, you pay homage to your ancestor. There is brahmanrin, because we are the only society which created an entire community especially dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. That's why we are knowledge society. The only claim we can have of being a Vishwaguru is through this only. All other claims are, we do not do it by, building mega architecture or infrastructure. We do it by leading the world in knowledge. So the Brahmin, the Rishi Rin and Nar Rin. Nar Rin is to your fellow beings all around. So you fulfill all of these rinas. In that you become responsible to nature, to culture, to family, to country, and to everyone.
Right.
So this is what it means being a Hindu. Now, what does it mean? Because that will necessitate some nitya ritual, some nitya karma in your life. that you have to do certain ritual, because ritual is how the Hindu world, dharmic ideas become concrete to you. How do we perceive them? What is dharma? It's not a man or a woman. To us, it becomes perceivable in the form of rituals and customs that are assigned, that are created by our ancestors. So by doing some ritual daily, by maintaining the continuities,
Right.
you become Hindu. For example, I still remember that one incident in my childhood when I was 5 years old. And my grandmother, although by that time we had LPG at home and we were cooking on gas stove and all of that. But there was also a chula in home because my grandmother was very fond of it, of cooking on chula, because they all maintained that the food that you cook there you cannot cook it on gas. And
I second that.
Thank you, sir. And in that, they used to preserve the embers. And that I had seen in even my maternal grandmother, my nani's house also. That because before matchboxes and these modern means of lighting, they had to preserve the coals. So every night those embers would be preserved. Every morning they will, bring the fire once again out of those embers. So sometimes those embers would not be doused for decades because it was considered very ashubha. The house was considered alive where a fire was kept alive. So we were literally the fire keepers, not just in puja ghar, not just in mandir, but in rasoi also. So that fire was kept for decades. And she said one day she held those coal embers with the tongues. And she showed me, do you know how old these are? These are 80 years old.
Wow.
So those embers were raised.
This is like the idea of Agnihotra, right?
Yes. Yeah. So her grandmother lighted those embers. Wow. She gave it to her daughter. She gave it to her daughter. And that is how those embers were being maintained through the generations. And sometimes you would bring those embers with you. They would travel with these embers. That fire can never be doused because that's a sign of being alive. So you have to maintain these continuities. The vigrahas would be transferred to the further generation. Sometimes it would be just a coconut. Because coconut is generally, when you do not have a vigraha, it is taken as the form of any Thakurji or any other deity that you are worshipping. It is considered a deity like. And sometimes even those coconuts would be, dry coconut would be transferred over generations. So that's how you build and maintain continuity. You keep the presence of the deities alive in the house, and you bring up your children in a way in which they also continue it. That is what it means being Hindu. We cannot limit it to our generation. If we do not transfer, if it dies, the continuity breaks. We cannot let that happen.
So full marks for the answer.
Thank you.
And this relates to the recent controversy on Twitter about this ritual, the thought and ritual that I have a belief, but I don't believe in this ritual stuff, that I want to connect to God directly, the Protestant trope, which is getting increasingly popular, right? But your definition of Hindu is so profound and beautiful that it covers both these aspects wonderfully and demonstrates that ritual is really the embodiment of intent. And that intent is informed by higher philosophy and culture. And ultimately, what you don't practice will wither away if you only keep it in the form of a potential. So it's almost like potential and kinetic energy, right? That if it's just a potential, you can't even keep track of where it is going.
You do not preserve your culture by saving philosophy. Because your enemies will save your philosophy, kill your culture, then teach them in their universities.
Exactly. And that's the museumification of culture.
Your culture.
So, like you rightly said, I mean, Hinduism, Hindu Dharma has thrived in this land because of the emphasis on ritual. And you don't even need to really understand it that way. You don't have to have an intellectual grasp of ritual to be able to perform it. But just the act of performing it and doing it over and over again makes it such a deep part of your being that whether you can articulate it or not is not important. You're not going to write books anyway. But when it comes to articulation, So here's a question for you. When it comes to articulation of what lies behind or what is underneath the ritual, is the epistemological framework. And you said that there is respect for the Veda, which is essential to being a Hindu.
Yeah.
So respect for Veda in that sense, in the intellectual or epistemological sense, is basically saying that you take the Veda as a pramana, which often leads to a situation where Hindus themselves would say that, oh, that is too literalist. That is like becoming Abrahamic.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that?
That worry is unfounded in my view. And it's very easy to see that. We consider it Shabda Pramana, not because we have to blindly believe in it. So there is a difference. And all of the people, most of the people who allege this, that you are being a literalist, they generally believe in science. So here there is a similarity between how the scientific system works and how our system works. For example, like you were saying, we do not believe in some say that we do not believe in the ritualistic aspect of it. This is like saying we do not believe in going through the entire process of launching a rocket, but we want the effect of the satellite. So it's simply like that we do not believe in this. We just believe in the philosophy. The philosophy won't actually transmit you the signal. You have to put in the work in a certain way in which it is supposed to be. So that's how ritual works also. So in a scientific system, we also take 99% of their work as Shabda Pramana. For example, you and I have not seen what happens inside the CERN laboratory. Still we believe it. So it is not blind belief. Why it is not blind belief? Because if you or I were to go there, learn that particular science, become that scientist, join that institute, and actually do that experiment, I will always find the same result in that lab. So if I were to learn all of that means, if I were to test it, that would never be untrue. That would never be false, because any scientific theory will be falsified by just one contrary result. So that is how science works. That is exactly how our system works also. That there is karma, prarabdha and punarjan, that there are many lives, that this is how ritual works. If you were to do sadhana under the guidance of a guru in a particular sampradaya over a certain period of time in a certain way, that is the internal mechanism. The only difference is that is external, that works on material world. This works on your inner world.
Yeah, like the third person to first person empiricism.
Yes.
Right.
So this is but in the way it works is similar. Yeah. That if you were to do that technique, follow that technique over a certain period of time, you will find the same results. And our Gyanis, Jivan Mukts, over the time for thousands of years have gone into that internal world, done that sadhana. Every single one of them has confirmed what's written in the Vedas. Not a single one has come out and said, this is wrong. This is why we consider it as Shabda Pramana. So it's not blind belief. It is because every single one Gyani who has taken that journey.
But what about the Nastika schools then?
They just deny that any of this exists. They never go into those processes.
Right.
So they have never gone into that processes. They just simply deny. They say it's nothing. We don't believe in it, and we believe in just enjoying life. The rest of the Hindu society couldn't care less.
I'm not talking about the
Charvak.
No, yeah. I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about, let's say, Buddhism, for example.
Yeah.
So Buddhism is considered a Nastika school because they don't take the Veda as pramana.
Yeah.
To my understanding, that is just saying that they have their own system, but they don't. I mean, some Buddhist philosophers would argue against Vedas and say that no, this is not correct.
Yeah.
And others would just be indifferent or ignore their the contents thereof.
Yeah.
So how does that account into it?
Even the Buddhists do not go against the Vedas for the reasons that we are discussing here, and there is a element of great belief involved in Buddhism also, because they maintain that what happened to Buddha was unprecedented.
Okay.
It happened for the first time, which has never happened before, that the height of knowledge that he reached had never happened before. And that is why we should listen to what he said. Otherwise, why listen to just Buddha? There are countless Gyanis in our tradition which existed before him, which existed along and after him. So there is no reason. So there is an element of axiomatic belief there. And they also never go against the axioms of Atma, Karma, Prarabdha and Punarjan.
Right.
Entire Buddhist system works entirely on that. They do not oppose the Vedas, they oppose the Brahmins because they suddenly became the competitor of Brahmins. So they started this, the social system. Buddha is unconcerned. Buddha doesn't use, in my view, there is a seminal mistake in not using the props of Atma and Brahman, because that sends his followers in a completely different direction. But he does not go against that tradition. His followers, because they suddenly see, because they were forced to become monks, it became huge monkish society. They suddenly became the competitors of the job aspect of Brahmins, the Pandits. And so then this whole competition starts where they throw all this mud. Then both sides, keep arguing against each other. There are some beautiful discussions also, great intellectual discussions, but also a lot of mudslinging that we see all over the history.
Well, of course, that happens even between
different sects. That's not uncommon. So the Vedas, what we are discussing about, that even they believe in, that Karma, Prarabdha, Punarjan, that thing even they believe in.
Right.
That's why I'm not willing to class them as an opponent society. No matter how much intellectual oppositions they have had with us, but they are not a civilization which is against us. We only have to become more powerful, assert our authority as the umbrella system. That's where Sri Ram Sarup Ji and his vision comes in. That Sanatan Dharma is the umbrella that the world has to accept for every other system, including Buddhism, Jainism, and then Shinto, Tao. That everyone has to accept. This is how they will be get abhaya to be what they want to be, what they are, with the Sanatan umbrella.
So I think this also provides a deep insight, almost like a master key to a lot of the contemporary problems. This dichotomy, enforced synthetic dichotomy between ritual and philosophy. That everything that we see today, I mean, especially the ecological crisis, they'll say that, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. Everything is just you need to. Nothing is in action because there is no emphasis on ritual. Because there is no understanding of ritual. And no knowledge is embodied that way. It is all here in the cerebral cortex. And you just keep regurgitating that and attending seminars and conferences. But nothing seems to be really applied. Except that which brings profit, of course. So, and another thing that when we talk about, you mentioned about keeping the flame alive and passing it over, it's something that was actually done by millions of people. And it also happens to be such a beautiful metaphor, right? And that process itself of keeping, of discarding the old and bringing new things, that emergent philosophy, that put in action, that is an answer to so many of the ecological problems. Like you say, you keep recycling. But if you don't do it in every single aspect of your life, and you just isolate that and you indoctrinate school kids into saying that you need to 3 hours and all that, and it is not effective at all. So I was thinking about some of the stuff that you used to write during the lockdown especially, and it was such beautiful writing.
Thank you.
Also provocative to some. And you had mentioned to me that is going to come out. I mean, not those writings, but that theme is going to is coming out in the form of a book. Tell us a little, I mean, whatever you can tell right now.
So that book is going to come, I hope so, in next 2-3 months. The publisher is ready. I have to finish 3 more chapters, which are going to be the last. The book is called The India That Was, Glimpses from a Disappearing World. So it starts from, its inspiration is that these agents of change, when we started witnessing them, when they said that everything about past, your past is bad, it was suffering, full of suffering, pain, poverty, and nothing else. And you have to change it, and you have to move forward. And they started selling us these ideas. There was this one very famous quip that change is the only constant in life, and they would keep repeating that ad nauseum. because you have to change this, so you have to buy this product. You have to change this, so you have to buy this service. Everything with change comes certain market product, either in service or in material, that you have to buy. So it is true that change is only constant in life, but only a Gyani or somewhere who is near Gyani can say that. For everyone else, what is stable in life is extremely important. Of course, change always keeps happening in any civilization, but that change is around 2 to 3% of what your known life is. Right. Now, my grandmother is still alive. She was the one who preserved the embers in a chula, and now we are into the age of LGBTQ and artificial transplants in our body and that kind of talks. It is so completely different. No species, no generation can tolerate that kind of change in one generation. That was not change. That was entire absolute destruction of entire civilizations and cultures in favor of a certain ideology which was wedded to a certain market policy. It was not a natural change. It was pushed on the entire world by the Western complex, by the Western civilization and the colonial complex. So the British left us, but the tendencies and the institutions and the initiatives that they took are still working on us. So that change was not natural. Now my focus was that what change did it bring? What did it mean, all of those changes, experientially to us? How did life change experientially to me, and to everyone who grew up in that era? For example, I am just 39 years old. I feel like I'm 150 years old because the childhood that I spent in is so radically changed. It feels like nothing from that has been carried over. And this did not happen by an invasion or by an active revolution, by active bloodshed. This happened through the agency of agents of change, quietly with everyone's collusion. True. That how everyone was made a partner in it and how everything changed. So for me, the inspiration of that book is what was the experience of daily life for us? What was cooking for us? What was eating for us? What it meant to us living in a family? What it meant to us taking education or going to a wedding or celebrating a festival, living life, what our economy was, what our ecological sense was, and how that has changed over the past 30, 40 years in all of our lives, especially in second, third tier cities of India. The first tier cities had started seeing some of those glimpses earlier on. But someone from a city like Gwalior or Agra, the cities which never saw those kinds of things, in a span of 30 years, everything was changed. And that change was extremely violent. I am speaking not physically, violent in the sense of civilizationally, culturally, because it swept away an entire civilization and culture right in front of our eyes through everyone's collusion. So I'm trying to record what it meant to be being an Indian, being a Hindu 30 years ago. I'm not referring any text. I'm not going to the Shastras. This is all about Loka. I speak more on Loka than Shastra. This is all about how life used to be for a practicing Hindu, for a simple Indian in a second, third tier city of India, so that at least like a morning dream, before even the memory fades, something of it is recorded.
Yeah, and that is the aspect that was so particularly appealing to me when I read those posts of yours, because in my personal life, coming from Kashmir to Delhi, it was an overnight destruction of everything that we knew before that. And not to mention that it was physically violent as well, not just culturally. And so when I read that those posts, there is a sense of longing that I so identify with. And it's almost like reading poetry. But some people, they accuse you of
Luddite.
Luddite and maybe being a romantic, and there's too much romanticism there. And so how would you respond to one particularly recurrent criticism, which is to say that you idealize that world, that you write it as if there was nothing wrong with it?
Yeah. No, I never say that. Actually, that's something that they allege on me. I've written it very clearly in some of my writings Depression is the absence of dukha. I mentioned very clearly, anyone who imagines that a Hindu society of past was a completely pleasant society where everyone is happy, that's an absurd thought, because life cannot exist with just pleasure or good or happiness. There has to be equal amount of pain and hardships. But a Hindu society, a traditional society, gives you ways to overcome pain and hardships in life. Not just overcome physically, but overcome in a way in which it elevates your consciousness, in which it gives you a philosophical, a spiritual sense of who we are and what life is. It gives you meaning. It gives you something to talk about. It gives you a structure which can support you in your weakest of moments. So, psychologically speaking, that's a civilization which supports individuals when they fall upon hard times. Psychologically speaking, modern civilization is a civilization which will bring you absolutely and completely down when you individually are down, because they have left no other cushion between the individual and the state. There is no family, there is no kutumba, there is no desh. Even the idea of gender is now constructed. So there is no identity. First of all, they destroy identity, and then they say that there is alienation, there is loneliness, which is absolutely the effect of their own efforts. So our civilization, I do not say that nothing should change. Of course, why should things remain static? There was a lot of bad in that era. For example, it was a socialist society. If you wanted to buy a scooter, you would have to actually file for 1 year or so, and then you would get a scooter, and those things, which were completely unnatural, which shouldn't be there, which were very rightly removed. But the way the supermarkets and huge corporations invaded and destroyed the small, beautiful ecosystems in our society. For example, any parent would send their children, small children, to buy ration and from a shop, from a local grocer. And the kids, 8 years old, 10 years old, would go. And we would go there. Sometimes our mothers would go. We would stand there, we would start chatting. There would be all the inquiries about how your children are, how life is. And somewhere during that very pleasant and very animated, gossipy conversations, the job would get done. But now you go to a supermarket, and contrary to what they say, it was also very quick. Even if you wanted 10 grams of something, even if you wanted 125 grams of something, those local Vaishya, Vanik, they were very actually particular.
And you could also get things on credit.
Yes, there was credit which needed no credit card, which was not predicated upon a global company, but upon the local trust that was built between communities and societies and families.
True.
So there was credit. There was long lines of credit. Actually, most of those local shops worked mostly on credit. That is how they functioned. That is how they knew that it was going to be. So it was a very benign world. It was a very pleasant, self-sufficient world. But there were forces which came from outside, just like a colonial force, which cannot leave you alone. Because for their philosophy, ideology to become complete, they need to change your life. For example, for a Christian to go to heaven, we cannot remain Hindu. For a Muslim to go to Jannat, we cannot remain Hindu. Similarly, for an enlightened being from enlightenment, to bear the fruits of enlightenment, we cannot remain undemocratic. Democracy and all its fruits have to be pushed down our throats in their own imagination if they have to bear the fruits of enlightenment. So these forces, these international forces, could not tolerate self-sufficient units which were dependent on each other only and not on larger things. So those units, when they were destroyed, they created a lot of global dependence between individuals and huge structures and huge institutions, which never used to be in that world where I was growing up. For example, in waste, now if you want to even dispose the bottle from which you just drank your water from, you will need an entire state to come up with a system in which they send these vehicles to collect, and all the campaign of developing that civic sense and putting that bottle in. When I remember my childhood, there was no waste disposal system because there was no waste to speak of. All the waste was organic. So mostly the waste was just vegetable and fruit peels, which would go directly from the kitchen in the garden. There was no waste to speak of. Everything was recycled to the point where it would disappear.
Yeah.
Clothes would be recycled and recycled
True.
and recycled, where at the point they would disintegrate.
Yeah.
And then when they were thrown, cotton when thrown in on ground, it actually disintegrates very soon.
Yeah.
So there was no artificial clothing, no plastic, no such thing which needed all of that. Now to have all of that in life, we need international systems, great campaigns to actually help us.
Yeah. So the other thing that I take away from your post, and which I hope that I will also find in your forthcoming book, is this idea of defining who the enemy is.
Yeah.
And you've developed I don't know if it is your vocabulary, but I've heard it only from you, a very powerful vocabulary of these three aspects: Shatrubodh, Swayambodh, and now you've added Saundaryabodh. So can you just expand on that a little bit?
So every civilization need to have a very clear idea of who they are and who they are not. So basically, what is the center? What is the boundary? Of course, everything that we do, everything that we are, emanates from the center. And its effect keeps diminishing as the distance from the center increases. But there comes a point where you have to define that this is not us. Very clearly, this is not us. These are the two bodhas. Swayambodh, what you actually are. So we talked about being Hindu. That is in a shell is what Swayambodh should be. And then the other aspect is Shatrubodh, of what you are not. Because very simply, why do we need Shatrubodh? Because Hindus have, it is very interesting, but they have a well mentality in one aspect. We are more than 1 billion. That's a huge, huge set of people. And all of our sects, what is our experience of different sects? That everyone worships their own deities in their own way, and they respect all other deities. So in that sense, the well is so huge that we imagine that everyone must be so. That just how we respect all other sects and they respect us within the Hindu Sanatan universe, so that others must also be like this, but which is not the truth. Even if when some of them accept that there might be some sects which are not like this, then they say that how are we concerned with them? If we do not concern ourselves with them, then we are safe. But that is not so. Because I like to say that you may not be interested in Islam, but Islam is interested in you. So prophetic monotheism is interested in you, because for their cosmology, theology to be complete, they need to convert us. We are critical to their design. So that's why you need to know what the Shatru is. Shatru, I do not mean individual on road or street. I mean ideologically. As civilizationally, when we define ourselves, there will be a category us. There will be a category of friends who are not us, but our friends. For example, the Buddhist countries, which should be our friends. And other similar natural religions like Chinese religions, which are ancestral religions, they should be our friends. But then there are other sects who actively try to destroy our religion, convert us, destroy our gods and their worship. They are very clearly ideologically our enemy, and we should be very, very aware, because they are clearly aware of it. They have a very long view of history. They work in arcs which are sometimes 100, 200, sometimes even 1,000 years long. They start working on issues and institutions. They put seeds of institutions which bear fruit sometimes 300 years later on. De Nobili, whom Sitaramji talks about in his book Catholic Ashrams, that how he instituted the design of fooling Hindus by taking on the attire of Brahmins and this. He is the one who actually instituted for the first time in our history, in very clear terms, anti-Brahminism, where he puts in that Brahmins are the roadblock in the Christian idea of converting India to Christianity. And so Hindus don't convert because everyone has deep trust in Brahmins and they are very cunning and clever. They understand our designs. So if you destroy this trust between the society and Brahmins, then it will become easy for us to pick them up one by one, other communities, and then gradually destroy everyone. And finally, ultimately, Brahmins also,
right,
as individuals. At that time, it seemed absurd. Even when Sitaramji writes Catholic Ashrams in 1980s, he sees that his design failed largely. But if he were to be here now, he would see that a lot of that has succeeded in a huge way. what is happening in Andhra now, what is happening in Punjab now, what is happening in even states like so-called Hindutva heartland like Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh. You see, churches have started appearing where they never were, where the Christian population is 0.25 or 0.15% or so. So they have such a long arc of history. And if you do not lose sight of your goal and who your enemy is and who you are, you will ultimately win. For example, there is a very short example of Mongol history. That Mongols actually defeated the Caliphate in Baghdad, the Islamic Caliphate in Baghdad, squarely. Did a genocide of around half of their population, killed the Caliph very brutally. And so they very convincingly defeated them, won them over, and they started ruling them. But the Muslim community, Islamic ideology was biding its time and preparing for what is going to happen later. They kept influencing. They kept influencing the kings one by one. So the first king who attacked, he of course remained pagan and Buddhist in his orientation, in his religion. And that remained so for 3 successive generations. But by that time, they were actually approaching every Mongol general in the court and converting them by saying that your populations are Muslim. If you become Muslim, it will actually be easy for you to govern them. And the pagan thinks that what if I also start worshipping that? At first, how it starts, that what is the harm in worshipping Jesus also? What is the harm in worshipping their gods and their ways of worship also? But they realized it much later on that this is an exclusive way that you cannot you cannot do anything else. And once you have converted, there is no way out. So they kept converting the generals until they waited by their time for 3 generations, until the 4th generation king, he converts to finally to Islam. So when Islamic kings defeat a non-Islamic society, they convert the population to Islam. When actually non-Islamic kings attack Islamic society, the population converts the king to Islam. So because they have a very long view, long arc of history. And this is how, when we talk about international relations, when we talk about geopolitics, if you miss this lens, you actually do not have anything else to see. That's why you need to have a very clear idea of who the main enemies are. And I keep saying this, Vishwaguru, we keep repeating that word. I'll again take a very small example of a Naga tribe. For example, Nagaland has more than 24, 25 tribes. Every tribe has a different language. Some of them are unintelligible to other languages. Until the beginning of 19th century, actually in the middle of 19th century, tribes who lived in Kohima were unaware almost completely of the tribes who lived in now in what is Burma, Myanmar. But in 20th century, there is a department in Hague, which is called what on the lines I am paraphrasing, Department for Unrepresented Peoples and Regions. And they have listed all Naga tribes, including the one on Burmese border, including the one that is in Kohima. Now, which civilization will win the war? A civilization which keeps registers on your every caste and tribe, or us who are unaware of any of this? I'm not saying we'll lose. I'm saying we have to build that attitude. If you want to be Vishwaguru, you need to have an opinion on everything and everyone under the sun. You cannot avoid it. We need to have an opinion. We need to have a view of everything, every civilization, every institution that exists all over the world.
True. No, but there is also a very real danger in this. If you think in this framework of Shatrubodh and Swayambodh, of Shatrubodh so overwhelmingly dominating the mind space that you forget who you are. And as the famous saying goes, that when you stare at the abyss stares at you. So you become the enemy. Don't you think that's like, I mean...
I have named the syndrome Saruman syndrome, because in Lord of the Rings, the wizard Saruman is the one who has given the task of studying the evil lord, Sauron. And he becomes so fascinated by their ways that he becomes a servant of the enemy. That is the Saruman syndrome. Now that happens when you do not have a strong Swayambodh. That happens when you have no Nitya Karma in your life. If you are worshipping a certain deity every single day, if you are doing Sandhya, if you are doing following any such rituals, you will never become them. You will be extremely and acutely aware of what they are and who they are, but you will never become them. So that's why it's two wheels. You can never imagine one without the other.
True. And I think that the key to keeping, as you rightly said, keeping Swayambodh potent is the action, is the performance
of rituals.
Even if you're not very, very good with the intellectual aspects of it, with the philosophy, because not everyone is cut out to be a philosopher.
And actually, I was going to say this when earlier we were discussing, the intellectual understanding cannot precede the ritualistic action. It only follows it.
Correct. You rationalize it.
Only follows it because it is not something which is open to you. As you cannot just read the Vedas, even if some claim so. You cannot just read the Brahma Sutras because there are actually so many commentaries. Why do the commentaries exist? Because the meaning in them is hidden when you utter that name. And Ramswarup explains this very well in What is Revelation. When you utter that name again and again and again, it purifies your chit. The sound of that mantra purifies your chit. When your chit becomes purified, then the mantra reveals its meanings to you. It is not out there in the open. The very structure of those mantras is that it's ensconced one within the other.
Absolutely.
That's how it works. So you have to follow it. Gradually, you will develop a great understanding of it. My personal experience is that I have never met a person who's deeply ritualistic and has been following rituals for a long period of time, who also does not understand it. The understanding dawns on him inevitably if he keeps following the rituals.
Correct. That is true. Absolutely. And what about Saundaryabodh then?
So Saundaryabodh is how you navigate through it. How does life not become so oppressive? Because I once wrote that a Hindu psyche is a difficult burden to carry because there is so much trauma, so much pain. And when you become conscious of it, how many dangers are facing us. There's, of course, prophetic monotheistic ideologies, then all the tropes in academia, institutions, and modern institutions. Then you tend to become a little depressed that so many forces are attacking us. With me, what happened is that because I always had literature, I always had arts and aesthetics, that never happened to me. Because the life was always so beautiful. I am very fond of saying that no matter what happens, there is no excuse of waking up in the morning and be sad. Because morning makes everything beautiful. Because there are flowers, there is that dawn, the light, the rays of dawn which breaks on you. And literature enhances all of that aesthetic sense. Whatever aesthetics is within you, when you study literature, arts, and all different form of arts, they actually connect with that inner sense of beauty. And gradually your entire life gets enveloped with that sense of beauty. And here I am not talking about the artificial beauty, because in our civilization, beauty is samkaksh, is equal to truth. So when you go deeper and deeper into it, it will lead you towards truth. Your pursuit of beauty, of Saundarya, is your pursuit of Satya also. Saundarya is Satya at the highest level. That's how all our disciplines, all our art disciplines are designed. For example, the Ras theory is that the Navaras leads you to the highest point. If you read the commentary of Abhinav Gupta, he turns a text on Natya completely into a spiritual text, in a text of self-realization. The way he talks about being Sahridaya or being Sadharanikaran, and all of this stuff, the different commentators on Natya Shastra. So our civilization is always about that. They have taken every branch of aesthetics, taken it to an extreme where it takes you to the supreme truth. It is capable of taking you to the supreme truth.
Right.
Same is true about iconography, sculpture, architecture. If you go to a temple, even if you have that beautiful Nagrik eye that you admire every piece of architecture and sculpture, that will also lead you gradually towards the highest truth. That keeps life livable, interesting, beautiful, pleasant and enjoyable. And there is no other way to go about it, because life cannot just be lived in these terms of what we are and what we are not. There has to be that pleasure also. But that pleasure has to be something which elevates you. For me, art is that which is beautiful, that which is meaningful, and that which elevates your consciousness.
So this idea of Saundaryabodh is something that you referred to earlier also. How do you look at the world? How do you digest experience?
Yes.
And I was just going through the book, the latest book by S.N. Balagangadhar. What does it mean to be an Indian? It's one of his most accessible works. So he writes there that trauma is basically experience that is unresolved. And using Saundaryabodh, you're basically, creating internally or psychologically, you're creating beauty out of pain.
Yes.
That is how it is. So, so talking of thinkers, right? A lot of people ask you about who do you read, what kind of influences you have, considering that you have such a wide, you have an opinion on such a wide range of topics, and well considered, thought through opinion, not just frivolous gyanbazi. So, what are the top 3 thinkers? I know it's a contextual question, but let's just forget about all that nuance. Right now, who would you say that top 3 influences as thinkers?
On me, very clearly, the 2 topmost influences are, one is Sri Ram Sarupji. I have repeatedly called him the greatest philosopher that came from Darshanik, that came from Bharat in the last 100 years. Even in certain things, greater than Aurobindo, because the way he imagines about the entire world, he has given you very clear Shatrubodh in some of his books, like Hindu View of Christianity and Islam, where he reverses the gaze. But most of his books, like on Hinduism, like Meditations, and most importantly, the word is Revelation, is on Swayambodh, where he talks about who we are, actually, going to the very core of us. And he writes extremely beautifully also. So all 3 bodhas are there, very much existent in him. No one has that wide a sight. He has also given us the solution for the global problems that we are speaking of. He is the first one who called for a Sanatan umbrella in the entire world, that all pagan traditions, non-monotheistic traditions, should come together, but under the umbrella, aegis of Sanatan Dharma. We have to guide, they have to take guidance from us, and then they become that. So he is obviously a great influence on me. Anything that I am stuck at, he will have written a certain paragraph about that somewhere. His thinking
and it's amazing that he has not written that much. He's just written a few,
very few books. So his brevity is amazing. His whole literature comes down to, I guess, not more than 800, 900 pages, which is the length of a longer book, when academics write. So in that span and space, he's managed to give opinion on almost everything in such words that is impossible to edit a single comma out of it. And that is the beauty of writing: brevity, clarity, simplicity. You will not be confused after reading him. You will not feel that you have wasted your time or words. And it will be extremely simple, in the sense that he will never use a word which should not be used.
Right.
He's not throwing off any vocabulary. He's that simple. So of course, Ram Sarupji is an influence, one of the greatest influence. Then Lauren Isley, as I also discussed.
Right.
That he is a scholar. He was born in US, of course, and so he was not born in a bhumi like Bharatvarsh of Sanatan Dharma. But he certainly had some spiritual experience, because the writing, if you read, particularly the book Firmament of Time and The Night Country, it cannot come from a Chitta Bhumi which has not touched deeply spiritual thoughts and ideas and activities. He writes on science and the world and culture, but he writes it from such perspective that it's sheer poetry. And my understanding about nature-culture continuum has come, and the binary of Lok and Shastra, Marg and Des, this binary in India also, it has crystallized through Lauren Isley. So he is the second greatest philosopher. My criteria is always that author has to be extremely beautiful also to read. So he is that. And then third great is Ivan Illich. No one else has criticized Western institutions from the inside as he has, including the church, including Christianity. So he's the one who gives you a formula that what used to be pagan and heathen became infidel, became white man's burden, native, and then has become the undeveloped regions of the world. It is the same urge to convert others, to be so intolerant of the other ways of life that they do not even have the right to exist independently. So no one else has gone that deep into ideas as Ivan Illich has, because the edge of West is that it creates institutions which far outlive their founders.
Right.
And they keep perpetuating those same ideas. No one apart from Illich has done that deep a criticism of those institutions. There is a way to dismantle those institutions if you really actually implement those things. So Ivan Illich is the third great philosopher that I bank upon.
Right. So Ivan Illich is the one who has also given these three great traps of modern life.
Yeah. So there is schooling, then there is medicine, four actually, the day job, and then housing.
Right.
So he says that these ideologies, corporations, make you slaves by making you participate in a system in which you become slaves of these four complexes. And the greatest rebellion against this is to find ways to come out of these four traps. He saw internet, as I also see it, as a way in which temporarily we can use that to actually come out of these traps. It might be on a different trap in its own, but it actually helps us to get out of the present traps in a long way.
So let's come to one of our favorite topics of discussion, which is the Jati and Varna system. Whether you call it a system or not, I'm not using it in a formal sense, but the ideas, the framework. Where do you see, like with all the critique of the modern world that you have read and understood and internalized, my question to you, and I'll start off straight away, hit the ground running, I'm not going into basics right here. So where do you see this ancient framework fitting or applied to the current times? Because, and I'll tell you why I'm asking this question, because a lot of people who, even if you give them the logic behind it, the rationale behind it, what it really means, what kind of an impact it has on everyday lives, on the sense of obligation, the kartavya bhav of people, and how these are like essentially the building blocks of our civilization. They say that, oh, that bus has left. And I don't really buy that argument. But I would like to hear you on, do you see any relevance to Varna and Jati in today's world?
So Jati, I do not speak much upon. It still exists, no matter how much you hate or love it. It is still there. There was a recent survey in which they say that around 88% of people still marry within caste. Because there really is no other way to marry except those 1% or 2% of Casanovas who are able to meet the perfect match. 98% of the society simply doesn't know how to marry. In that sense, Jati is still very relevant and it still stays as a unit. No matter how, I'm not saying here it's good and bad, but it stays. Varna, of course, Varnashram Dharma is no longer there. As we see the society, it no longer exists as such. Jati is there, Varnashram Dharma has fallen apart. Is there relevance for it in present? We will say use that only when we use an arrow of time. We use the circular view of time. Right now, it is not there. Future, it will inevitably come back. There is no other way. How it will, I do not exactly know. But it is inevitable to come back because it is the very nature of things. It is not how some evil Brahmins machinated and created something. It is how things are. They just simply recognized it. Alvin Toffler in Power Shift divides society in four parts. He says it creates, there are four main chunks of society, classes. One is mind, who have the power of mind. Second is muscle. Third is money. And fourth is masses. Now what is it? So it is basically, he's repeating Varnashram Dharma in a different way. Jonathan Haidt also says that it works. That when you create a society which is like this, it works. But I will want to attract our attention towards a point that this hatred of even talking about Varnashram Dharma is very unnatural, it's created, it's artificial. Because if you really argue, if you really study it, it is the most democratic system that you can ever imagine. No one has divided power into such very defined units and kept them always separate from each other, yet in conjunction so that the society works. Here I will use that difference between India and China, the only other civilization which is comparable to the glory of Bharatvarsha, which is the Chinese civilization. Even they could come up only with Trivarna. They have the view of Vaishya. They do not exactly call it like that, but if you read their texts, they have this classification of course, the kings and the generals, nobles. Then there is the merchants and the masses. But they have Trivan, but not Chaturvan, not the imagination of Brahmins. Bharat is the only society which has come up with the Chaturvan system. And why is it so amazing? Because they created a Varna inside society which has no stake in Sansara and yet creates and advises the laws that govern that same Sansara, same society. Now, you cannot get more democratic than that. Because the greatest problem all over the world in administration and management and about politics and constitution building and all is, who will bail the cat? That the one who disburses dand on everyone, disburses law on everyone, who will control that person or that institution or that entity? That's why in Enlightenment, they come up with a very abstract notion of sovereign, because they remove the divine from the center, because their divine was, of course, very undivine from our point of view. So they had to do that sooner or later. So they came up with the idea of sovereign. But who will make sure that that sovereign is not corrupted if it is made from the same individuals whom they are not trusting at the first place? This is the same problem that communism struck at. Because they said that you cannot leave society on its own because people are corrupt, individuals are corrupt, they will exploit each other. So a party will oversee them, which will make sure that they don't exploit each other, but they forgot that the party is built of the same individuals who will turn that institution into an institution of extreme oppression, which, as ludicrous as it sounds, which can happen in democratic, so-called Western liberal electoral democracy also. So until
this is like the same problem that this India against corruption. They said that there will be a Lokpal, but who's going to monitor the
Lokpal? So here you have an idea that you have an entire one which are basically knowledge pursuers who have no stake in the material possessions of this world, but still they have the position, they only have the position to advise on the Sanatan rules. Every community had the right to create its own rules based on their own local regional food and clothing and all. But they had the right to create and advise the Sanatan rules, which are the universal rules which are being made. So this is such an amazing institution that no one ever has come up with. Sengol, if we talk about let's concretize that idea. What is the idea of Sengol? That Raja to sabko dand deta hai, par Raja kiska dand manega? Raja Dharma ka dand manega. And Sengol is a representation of the same Dharma, a very concrete representation. That whose dand will the king listen to? That is the very idea of Chaturvan. That is the very idea of Varnashram Dharma. So this is its eternal relevance. Whether it doesn't exist now, it will come in force later on. And as I see it, as certain tantric sects and texts have also tried to tackle it, we follow Samanya Dharma right now. And if enough people do it over a period of time, our tendencies will lead us to a period, to a society where once again that structure will be created from within. Because my guru used to say that the seed of every Sanatan institution is in the chitta itself, the greatest, the largest, the greatest chitta itself, which is the Brahm itself.
Right.
And these are not lost. Once you meditate enough, once you go deep into sadhana, that structure will come springing again. Even if they burn all the books, even if they destroy all the institutions, all of that will be created once again from a jnani, a sadhak who is doing great sadhana. So that will happen. The second part of it is, I would like to attract the attention that Varnashram, there is that word ashram, that we cannot remember Varna and forget ashram. That they talk about that it builds on the distinction of discrimination of birth. Of course, discrimination is not an evil word. Discrimination in Hindi, it translates as viveka. How do you discriminate between what is good and what's bad? So discrimination is not bad. But one part of it works on the differences of individuals. The another part, ashram, makes sure that even in the same life, this life, everyone becomes same at the end of his life. The four ashrams make sure, first is brahmacharya, then grahastha. In vanprastha, those divisions start disappearing, and in sannyas, it completely disappears. So even in this life, they actually make everyone equal towards the end by working on by recognizing that people are distinct, they are different from each other, by working on their strengths, and then later leading on to the same unity, which can only be spiritual. So even in the same life, there is that which people are not willing to look to, because there is this irrational hatred against it.
Yeah.
That is being infused very artificially in our system.
No, of course. And you mentioned about the anti-Brahmin trope,
Yes.
how that came into being in the
now it is being successful.
Yeah, now it is being successful. And there's also this very deep repulsion with the idea of birth being a determining factor in your identity.
Yeah.
Which is a serious paradox actually, because birth ultimately is, and I did write a little bit about that birth ultimately is the final determinant.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing as certain as birth.
You cannot choose your parents.
Yeah.
No matter how much you try.
Yeah.
Correct. My parents didn't ask me before plopping me into this world. So, you cannot choose that.
And also the fact that, this birth being such an important thing is even more relevant today with exponential technology under our command, where I don't think the conservatives anywhere fully appreciate the idea of the progressives of gender not being final, because
you can construct your child as you want now.
Yeah, you can construct your child, and you can also, I mean, not today. Today there may be certain problems. That is one of the criticisms that the conservatives have, especially in the West. They'll say that they went for a gender change surgery for this kid, and the kid had a miserable life after that because he or she ended up being more confused.
Yeah.
But that's just the march of technology, and who knows, 10 years down the line they would have solved that problem. Yeah. So you can actually, with technological intervention, hypothetically speaking, 10 years down the line, it may be very well possible that you entirely make that shift and there is no problem. Yeah. So I had asked that question once: where do you draw the line? And for a Hindu, that line is the birth, because that is finality. Yeah. And you accept the circumstances of your birth.
Yeah.
And the society is so organized that it does not exploit you on that basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is very simple to understand. Yeah. However, I mean, the kind of reactions, the animus against this whole idea is so much, and it is perhaps also because we have so deeply internalized the meritocratic framework ideal.
Actually, Varnashram Dharma is a great bulwark against evil discrimination against individual beings. Exactly. It makes sure that your differences are recognized, but then there are institutions. As I said, there is ashram, and then there are institutions within our society. Nobody discriminates against people in a temple. On that basis, in Jatra, there are no jatis. There is a famous saying. So within our society, there are institutions, they recognize your distinctions, work on that, but then they work on an aspect so that everyone gets dignity which is due to them. Yeah. It is actually a bulwark against evil discrimination, which very ironically is shown as the ultimate way to discriminate. Yeah. And until you talk about Punarjan, because we have talked about in this talk also, any talk about Varnashram Dharma without talking about rebirth is actually dishonest, because whole Hindu cosmology is built on that. Whole Buddhist cosmology is built on that. If you refuse to talk about that, others may consider it a belief. But then there are so many beliefs on which actually Israel is created because of their religious belief, because of their book says so. Who knows what happened? But Israel was created because there was the book. So if even if they consider that it's a belief, we have to go forward with it. We have to start proclaiming it in public that it's dishonest to talk about Varnashram Dharma and not talk about rebirth. It cannot be talked in isolation.
Yeah, in a recent podcast that I did with Op India, Nupur, she asked me this question about, the relationship of Hindus with other Indic faiths.
Yeah.
And, it occurred to me then, and I did express that the problem is not that, it's basically saying that there is so much in common and there are a few things which are different.
Yeah.
But those differences get accentuated because Hindus collectively behave like doormats.
Yeah.
we are a colonized people, deeply colonized, and our relationship with our allies also reflects there.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there is a natural potential for coalition with non-monotheistic cultures.
Yeah.
Yet that does not happen.
Yeah.
We are not able to keep good relations even with Nepal.
Yeah.
So part of this vilification of this very central idea of Dharma, which is Varnashram, I think is because we do not exercise that kind of power.
Yeah.
And we always talk about it as if it is just, it's something that is embarrassing to us.
Yeah.
And so the others will ride that wave, right?
Yeah.
And they've been at it since the colonial times.
Yeah.
So
it may or may not exist right now.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we go back in time and say that it was evil then.
Right.
So because a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
It may not be functional right now. So here I would just like to add this fact. Certain Hindus believe that Varnashram Dharma is complete 100% Sanatan Dharma. If that were so, we would no longer be Hindus anymore.
Yeah.
Or Sanatanis anymore.
True.
So Sanatan Dharma has the potential to exist even when its central institution collapses, to exist over a certain period of time, and then spring back that institution when the conditions are so conducive.
Absolutely. That I totally agree with. Because a lot of people, like you rightly say, they think that if that is not there, then that is the end of the game. That is too much of a black pill.
Yeah.
So this brings me to the idea of Dharmic expansionism, which you have touched upon, and which Ram Swarupji has also so beautifully explained. So in the Northeast, right? And I do believe that you're also planning to write on that, right? So what is the relationship right now that you see of the people in the northeastern parts of India, the various tribes and different sets of groups of people, identities, and the synthetic animosity right now that exists? What is currently the source of that, and how do we expand the footprint of our civilization there?
The source of that is very clearly that our political center after 1947 has very actively ignored the Northeast, and it has allowed what we classify in Shatrubodh as the enemy ideologies, enemy civilizations on the level of ideas, to take over many tribes and sects all over Northeast. Simply saying, they are being converted to Christianity. There are 3 Christian majority states, 2 almost completely Christian, Nagaland and Mizoram. Meghalaya is fast becoming completely, it is now around 75% Christian. It is fast becoming 100% Christian. Arunachal Pradesh, as we speak, within a span of 20 to 25 years, has become from 0 to 52% Christian. It was around 34% Christian in 2011. Now the data is there because it has not been done for the last 13-14 years. 55% Christian, which leaves only around 45 to Hindus and other different sects that exist there. So, in our apathy, after post-independence apathy, we have become like this. And if you let your people follow a religion which in concept itself wants to destroy your religion, then even territorially, it will not be conducive to you. There is so much animosity against the Indian state in those parts of Bharatvarsh, because culturally and religiously they are not a part of the culture that is the culture of Bharatvarsh or Sanatan Dharma. That is why they have even become territorially against you. That is why the insurgencies, last Nagaland is famous as the longest insurgency against a state in all of independent democratic world in history in last 120 years, because it has been going on since they declared independence on 14th of August 1947. Since then they have been fighting against Indian state. Now it has become how many years to independence? 70, more than 75, 76 years or so.
But then these were polytheistic tribes, weren't they?
Yes,
so they were. You say that they are not part of the mainstream culture, are you in some sense also saying that they were the ones, though they were polytheistic and had a high regard for nature and other stuff, that they did not adopt the Varnashram Dharma?
In Nagaland, of course, before this, there was no Varnashram Dharma. But this is the story that I'm coming to, that this apathy didn't exist in our past until just before the British come. Early 19th century, Hindu sampradayas, Hindu gurus, swamis are going all over Northeast, taking dharma to them, teaching them the value of Sanatan Dharma, and one by one, for the want of a better word, actually converting them to connecting them to the Vedic and Sanskrit culture. It is not a conversion in the sense in which Christianity does or Islam does, because they tend to destroy what they are worshipping. We never did that. Meiteis of Manipur, the largest Hindu tribe in Manipur, Meiteis who live in the valley, they are worshippers of Sanamahi. There is a god, a deity Sanamahi. And in every home you will find a shrine. We never tried to suppress it, but along with it, we gave them the worship of Vishnu, of Shiv, of Shakti. So until 18th century, Sriman Sankardev is going in 16th century, I guess, to Upper Assam. And at that time, because in those areas, there was no great infrastructure. The earliest infrastructure was destroyed. The homes had come and there was no great infrastructure there. So there is no stone temples. They are just bamboo mats, they are huts. They are not even great, huge vigrahas. They take a small metal vigrahas, or sometimes not even that, just Gita. And they create namghars, where they do sankirtan of the name of the Lord. And by that, they made sure that the entire area was completely Vaishnava. This happened to Meiteis of Manipur. This happened to Tripuri tribes and the Hindus of Tripura. This happened in many ways to Sikkim and many parts of Arunachal. But some hills were more difficult than others. And in the era in which grey areas, no man's land, were possible to exist, we had the policy generally that we did not disturb them too much. But even then, our ideas had reached there. And we were on the verge of penetrating those hills too. Our gurus, our sampradayas were on the verge of penetrating when the British intervened. And that process actually broke suddenly. And after the British left, it was, we didn't even think about what was happening. The colonial idea continued. Because when the British came, they demarked the boundary, Nefa, Nagaland, Mizoram, and Tripura and Meghalaya. And they argued that we are not comfortable with these tribes who keep moving from one land to another. So we have to wed a certain tribe to a certain hilly area. And they need to be loyal to us. And the best way to do that is to convert them to Christianity, because their religion should be akin to ours. This is how that the powers which are ruling in Calcutta and then Delhi, the border should be aligned to them. Now, after independence, we should have thought in our way that those borders should be aligned to Sanatan Dharma and not Christianity. But we had no long arc of history. We had no view of what was happening. The whole parishram, whole effort of all our great gurus in a lot of these areas was destroyed upon independence, when we just left them in apathy.
Yeah, so my question is, what prevented our swamis and sadhus from continuing that mission?
The British interlude, basically. So the areas which they had influenced and Sanskritized, for example, Assam and Manipur, Tripura and Sikkim, many parts of Arunachal, they are still Hindu. They were then creating them, using them as springboards to actually influence even more inaccessible, difficult hills. This is the Dharmic expansionism. They were not stopping. They had no idea of being confined in these boundaries. They were actually climbing the hills to influence the hills also. The reason is, and the evidence is, that Mizo language has entire Ramayana and Mahabharata. And there are around 20 tribes in all of Northeast. Half of them are Christian, more than half of them are Christian, who have entire Ramayana and Mahabharata in their language, oral. Not, of course, they didn't have any script. Oral Ramayana. And to the extent where even the name Ram, they have translated into their language. So in Mizoram, in Mizo Ramayana, Ram is not Ram, it is some other word that I've forgotten now in their language. Wow. It was so deeply embedded into their culture. This is until, and this researchers could find until 1970s, which means that the echoes of Dharma and Dharmic expansionism could be found even in 1970s. Had we given some attention towards this civilizational religious aspect, dharmic aspect of our civilization, then a lot more could have been saved than what is now. And if we become more conscious, actually, that will be a formula. I'm going to write on it too, that what is the way forward for Dharma. Because as I like to say, we do not intend to destroy any culture, any way of worship and life. We intend to give them abhaya. But if we do not spread our umbrella over them, some monotheistic, destructive, predatory ideology will come and will destroy them. So if we do not spread our umbrella, they will bring in their guns. So it's better that we do.
Right. And that is as clear as it gets. How dharmic expansionism is different
from the monotheistic expansionism.
Right. So, so we've talked about a lot of stuff in these couple of hours. And I would like to circle back to, as part of the conclusion, circle back to what you guys are doing at Brhat. And I think that people who have watched it and made it so far will especially benefit now, given all the conversation, about what you are doing at Brhat again. So let's go back to that same question. And can you address it again?
What do we do? So, like I said, we intend to connect culture to policy. We take inspiration from Sitaram Goyalji, who criticized some of the greatest Hindu institutions in as severe language as possible. But at the same time, he was ready to work with individuals and institutions who were conducive to his ideas. We have the same policy. We need to push culture-conducive policy wherever it is possible with whichever individual and institution we can work with. At the same time, we have to keep increasing the demand. See, nobody likes prophetic monotheistic sects. They keep pressing on their demand and they do not relent. If we create a certain number of percentage within the Hindu society, which puts on the Hindu demands and doesn't relent on them, then the policies will start turning our way. So second part is demand creation, which our culture vertical does. The policy is direct work with those individuals and institutions where we can directly influence policy through IKS in education. And third part is, of course, perpetuation of what you create through institution to future generations, which is our leadership part, teaching part, where we create more like us, so that even after we are burnt out and we are gone, there's that institution that Dharmic carries on.
So that's the long arc that you are aiming at. So I wish you the very best.
Thank you.
And I think that all of us would benefit from your success.
Thank you.
And so I really hope and pray that Brhat achieves what it sets out to do, what it has set out to do, and Dharm ki jai ho.
Dharm ki jai ho.
Thank you.